listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. In today's deep dive, we'll unpack last night's federal budget. Sally Tindall from Canstar will join us to find out if the tax cuts go far enough. Also, the major boost for healthcare and why many experts are now predicting there may not be any more cuts to interest rates this year. But first, let's check our headlines this Wednesday, the 26th of March. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has blasted the opposition for not backing its tax cuts from last night's federal budget. Labor rushed through the legislation in the House of Representatives earlier today with the support of the Greens and Independents. I spoke with Mr Albanese earlier on Channel 7.
We know that people have been under cost of living pressure. That's why we're not just sitting back wringing our hands, we're taking action. And the House of Representatives has just passed our tax cuts to add to the tax cuts that we passed last year. Peter Dutton and the Coalition have voted against all of our cost of living support, and today they voted against these tax cuts that are modest but will make a difference.
The opposition claims the government's budget is a hoax and a band-aid for a bullet wound. Mr Dutton is handing down his budget reply tomorrow night with speculation of a significant announcement. Up to 600 jobs are at risk as a major Australian fashion business folds. The parent company of Jeanswest has gone into administration and is set to close 90 stores across the country. Jeanswest stores will stay open with current stock cleared at reduced prices. And forget clunky hearing aids, your AirPods Pro 2 can now do the job. The technology has just been approved for the AirPods to allow users to access hearing tests and also for a sound boost to help with mild to moderate hearing loss. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Sally Tindall from Canstar on what this year's federal budget means for you, from tax cuts to healthcare boosts and what it means for inflation, housing and interest rates. Sally, thanks so much for joining us. As we know, front and centre for voters and, of course, the budget has been the cost of living crisis. If we can just go through some stats regarding how much prices have increased for Australians. We've seen an increase of about 40% of energy costs, and we know they're going to increase again from July. We've seen the cost at the supermarkets increase by about 30%. We've seen car insurance increase by 40%, and the average home loan has increased by more than $2,000 a month. Now, front and centre for Mr Albanese or Mr Chalmers' budget has been a $5 tax cut. So does this go far enough?
Well, absolutely not, especially when you put all the numbers on the table like that. Health insurance, private health insurance, which the government will penalise you for when you earn over a certain income or a certain age, that's also rising on the 1st of April. Everything is continuing to go up and up. The cost of living crunch is not behind us. I know we are making progress on inflation. The latest inflation data out just this morning is showing that even core inflation is down at 2.7%. So we are making progress, but that doesn't mean the cost of living is now easing. It just means it's not going up at such a fast pace. Families are hurting from this period of time where we've really had to knuckle down and save every dollar. I don't know that $5 in over 15 months' time is going to cut it.
Well, as we know, Sally, sometimes in some cafes, $5 won't even buy you a coffee at the moment. So when they're saying this is providing cost of living relief, it really isn't, is it?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. $5 won't cover much at all. It certainly won't cover the rise in your insurance premiums, whether that's car or home and contents, health, any of them, not to mention the mortgage or rents. I mean, again, we just saw the ABS data come out. Rents have increased 5.5% annually. And it's not like renters across the country are flush with options here because of the housing crisis, because of the shortage of supply in stock. People can't move to a cheaper property. In fact, if they're forced to move, they're probably looking down the barrel of a very steep price rise there as well.
So let's unpack this. We know the $5 tax cut, which, as you mentioned, won't be effective to next year, really isn't providing any immediate relief to Australians struggling right now. Let's talk about the energy rebate or energy relief. Now, as we know, we've seen a massive increase in energy bills. They're saying this will provide some relief, $150 rebate. But a lot of critics are saying, why is this not means tested? So two questions to you about that rebate. Can it be means tested? And do you think it will actually provide any financial relief?
Well, absolutely. Of course, it can be means tested. It can't be means tested if the government chooses, as they have done, to give that money to the electricity providers and then the electricity providers then put it in your bill. What the providers say is, well, we don't know how much you earn, and they don't. But the government can apply it through the tax office, and this is how they do a lot of other assistance that they roll out. Just think of childcare assistance or the private health insurance rebate. Even to a point, tax is means tested because you go up in different tax brackets. It is entirely possible, but the government has chosen to do it by giving it to the electricity providers so that it will artificially bring down electricity prices, or rather, I probably should say temporarily bring down electricity prices, which then flows through to headline inflation. It's brought that headline inflation number down to 2.4% in the latest figures. That's actually below the RBA target, but the RBA knows that that number is entirely temporary. It's been reduced by that rebate, and it's looking at core inflation as a result. And to be fair, it looks at the quarterly data set. The quarterly data set says core inflation is still sitting at 3.2%. That's still a decent way from the RBA's target of 2.5%. We've got a long road still to go.
So critically on inflation, because for the majority of Australians right now, that inflation that was out of control sparked the Reserve Bank to really increase the official cash rate. The federal government right now is hoping there's already been one official cut to the cash rate. Do you think now the RBA will be looking very cautiously at cutting rates again?
Look, Governor Bullock already has said this even before the budget came out. After the first cash rate cut, which we saw in February, the governor came out and said, do not expect a number of cuts in quick succession. I think we expect that because that's what it was like on the way up. We saw 13 rate hikes. A lot of them were back to back. Some of them were double. The second all the way through to the fifth were doubles, right? And so we're used to seeing this flurry of RBA changes. This is not going to happen on the way down. I think they're going to pause for the moment, see how this one cut filters through to the economy. You've got to remember, when it comes to home loan cuts, a lot of people will not have seen a drop in their minimum monthly repayments yet, even if they picked up the phone to their bank and asked them to pass it on. And that's because it takes time. It typically takes at least a month or so for the bank to filter that through to your monthly repayments. And then it depends on where in the monthly cycle you are as to when you'll see that relief. So for most people, they haven't even seen the relief from the home loan rate cut that we got back in February. So the RBA is going to really want to take its time to understand the impact of that first cut. But also there are a lot of other factors happening, particularly globally. It was mentioned repeatedly in the budget last night, and the RBA has it front of mind as well, particularly the Trump tariffs. I can't see them making any decisions to cut further until they better understand the full impact of the Trump tariffs in particular, but other global uncertainties as well.
And that's a really interesting point, Sally, because regardless of whether it is the Liberal Party in government or the Labor Party in government, they can have certain control over inflation. But as we've seen, these very concerning events overseas, that's war in Ukraine, the Trump tariffs, the chaos that some are saying is unfolding in the US right now, that's all out of our government's control.
Absolutely. And it really can play havoc on things like petrol prices and certainly with the tariffs, it could have, a big impact on prices here in Australia. It can have a big impact on the dollar, you name it. And so there's a lot of factors outside of the government's control, outside of the RBA's control. And so they're going to move quite slowly from here on in, I think, for the rest of the year to understand exactly the lay of the land. They don't need to rush to do anything. And that's probably critical because unemployment is still at 4.1%. That's incredibly low considering the rate tightening that we've been under over the last 2 and a bit, almost 3 years now, that really healthy unemployment number of 4.1, that gives them the cover to stay on hold for the short term at least, but also the economy. I know that in many cases it's on life support, but it is still growing. It is very much reliant on government spending, but as we saw in the budget last night, the government is saying that will move to, growth in the private sector in the future. And so those two factors in particular give the RBA a lot of time to understand the bigger picture here.
Sally, in regards to the opposition, let's talk about Peter Dutton. His budget reply is tomorrow night, but the opposition's already come out and slammed the federal government. We understand there's an election just around the corner, so it's all about politics rather than policy. Now, the opposition has called the federal government's budget a cruel hoax, quote saying it's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Do you think that's true?
Look, when you put it in the context of $5 a week in, 15 months' time, and then you go through all the price increases that families and households have been under, say, over the last couple of years, yeah, it does feel like a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. But that's just one measure in the budget in isolation. There were some fantastic measures, particularly around health in the budget. But unfortunately, because this budget is on the eve of an election, it has become a magic show. The Treasurer last night pulled a rabbit out of his hat with those, tax cuts that no one saw coming. And then tomorrow night in Peter Dutton's reply speech, we are probably going to see him pull out some sort of rabbit out of a hat. But is this the way we want to set policy here in Australia? Is this the right thing for Australians and their health, the long-term health of our nation? And unfortunately, so often we do see that politics trumps good policy. And you only have to look back to when Bill Shorten was on the campaign trail, really out there spruiking for negative gearing changes. It blew up in his face. I don't see the Labor Party, really taking any sort of risks when it comes to an election campaign, because they've got very recent lived experience of that not panning out very well for them. I think one option might be longer terms. So we're currently on a 3-year term for the federal parliament. Why not look at 4-year terms? At least that gives them a little bit more time to get some good policies up and running.
Sally, so not much cost of living relief, but there have been some positives from the budget. Tell us what stood out for you.
Oh, look, the shining light for me, unequivocally, is the assistance in the health sector. Capping, PBS medicines at $25, that's so important. Adding new medicines onto the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, the PBS, that's incredibly important for people that take those medications. It will help their hip pocket dramatically. More bulk billing GP clinics. They're investing in giving GP clinics incentives so that they can bulk bill all of their patients. I think that will be fantastic if it works. 50 new urgent care clinics. I can talk firsthand about the importance of urgent care clinics. I've taken my 8-year-old son to one of those when he cracked open his eyebrow in the schoolyard. It takes the load off the hospital system. It takes the load off emergency departments, but also delivers professional and timely care to people that need it urgently. And then, of course, 11 new endometriosis clinics and the 33 in total will also treat menopause. I think that's fantastic as well. They're really honing in on women's health there. Other things in the budget, look, cutting help debts by 20%, I think that's also really important, because encouraging kids into university is so important for our future. We don't want to scare them off with giant help debts that they can't get rid of for sometimes decades to come. And then a really interesting one for me, it was more policy related rather than hip pocket, banning non-compete clauses for workers who are earning up to $175,000 a year. I think a lot of people get to an employer, they sign a contract and they don't even understand what that non-compete clause means. It means that they can't go to a competitor within a set period of time of leaving their current employer. And I think that it stops people when they do realise what they've signed. It stops people from exploring new opportunities. We want people to be able to progress their career. Hate for some fine print to trip them up like that.
Absolutely. Great point, Sally. Overall then, with everything we've spoken about this afternoon, out of 10, what do you rate Jim Chalmers' budget for 2025?
All right, I think I'm going with 7 out of 10. I might have gone a bit lower, but I think just the healthcare initiatives are so important. I think it pops it up to a 7.
Sally, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Natasha.
That was Sally Tindall from CanStar. And that's it for this episode of the Briefing Afternoon Edition. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube. Just need to search Listener Newsroom, which is spelled LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you tomorrow.